This story took place on Christmas Eve 1944, 80 years ago. The title of the story is Roasting Herman, and the story takes place in the Ardennes forest in what is known as the Ardennes counteroffensive, what many of us know as the Battle of the Bulge. It was the last major German offensive campaign on the Western Front during World War II. The battle took place in the dead of winter, and it lasted from December 16, 1944 to January 25, 1945. The weather conditions were as harsh as the battles were intense. The German offensive caught the Allies by surprise. The Germans had more experience in the harsh conditions and better knowledge of the terrain. But while they slowed Allied progress, they were still not able to turn the tide of the war, and both sides suffered significant casualties. Along this time, there was a young man by the name of Fritz Winken. He was 12 years old. He and his mother were living in a small house in the Herman forest near the German-Belgian border. On this particular evening, December the 24th, 1944, Fritz and his mother, Elizabeth, were alone when Fritz heard a knock on the door. They were alone because his father had been reassigned to another village and was indeed fighting for the German army. So the fighting around them was intense, and Fritz says, "We could hear the incessant booming of field guns. Planes soared continuously overhead. At night, searchlights stabbed through the darkness. It was hardly the setting that one would expect for the events that would take place in the life of young Fritz." It was Christmas Eve, and the last desperate German offensive World War II raged around our tiny cabin. Suddenly there was a knock on the door. When that first knock came, Mother quickly blew out the candles. Then, as I went to answer it, she stepped ahead of me and pushed open the door. Outside, like phantoms against snow-clad trees, stood two steel-helmeted men. One of them spoke to Mother in a language we did not understand, pointing to a third man lying in the snow. She realized before I did that these were American soldiers. They were enemies. The American soldiers were armed. They could have easily forced their way into the cottage, and Elizabeth knew it, but they didn't. It was clear that the wounded soldier was in serious condition, so she opened up her home and allowed them to come in. Not only did she invite them in, but she began attending to their wounds. We heard that the stocky, dark-haired fellow was Jim. His friend was tall and slender, and his name was Ralph. The wounded one was Harry, who was now sleeping on my bed. His face was white as snow. They had lost their battalion and had wandered in the forest for 3 days looking for Americans and hiding from the Germans. They hadn't shaved, but still, without their heavy coats, they looked merely like big boys, and that's the way Mother began to treat them. "Go get Herman," Elizabeth instructed her young son. Elizabeth had very little respect for Herman Goering, so she had named her rooster Herman after him. Herman, the rooster, was being preserved and fattened in the hopes that Fritz's father would be home for Christmas. Elizabeth now had another purpose for Herman. While Fritz and his mother continued to address the wounds of the American soldiers, Herman was being prepared as a Christmas meal for these enemy strangers in their home. As Fritz was setting the table for the meal, he heard another knock at the door. Expecting to find more Americans, I opened the door without hesitation. There stood 4 soldiers, wearing uniforms quite familiar to me after 5 years of war. They were the Wehrmacht, Germans. I was paralyzed with fear. Although still a child, I knew the law. Sheltering enemy soldiers constituted high treason. We could all be shot. Mother was frightened too. Her face was white, but she stepped outside and said quietly, "These soldiers wished her a Merry Christmas too." The 4 Germans standing outside their door had been disconnected from their regiment, and they were seeking rest for the night. Elizabeth replied, of course, and offered them a place to stay and a place at their table. But she also warned them. She said, "We have 3 other guests, whom you may not consider friends." Then her voice was suddenly sterner than I'd ever heard it before. She said, "This is Christmas Eve. There will be no shooting here." When the German corporal demanded to know who was inside, Elizabeth responded by explaining, "You could be my sons, and so could those in there. A boy with a gunshot wound fighting for his life, his 2 friends lost like you, and just as hungry and exhausted as you. This one night," she turned to the corporal and raised her voice a little, "this Christmas night, let us forget about the killing." The Germans were slow to respond, but she ordered them to put their weapons on the woodpile and gave the same instructions to the American soldiers. There were only 3 chairs in the cottage and a total of 9 people at the dinner table, so additional seating was improvised using a bed. It goes without saying that these enemies, separated by war and language, had to adjust to a comfort level that they were not prepared for. As they prepared for the meal, one of the German soldiers drew out a bottle of wine and a loaf of rye bread to become part of the meal. Then Mother said grace. And I noticed that there were tears in her eyes as she said the old familiar words, "Come, Herr Jesus, be our guest." And I looked around the room at these soldiers, these young boys again. I saw tears in their eyes as well. Just before midnight, Mother went to the doorstep and asked us to join her, to look up at the Star of Bethlehem. We all stood there beside her, except Harry, who was still sleeping. For all of us during that moment of silence, looking at the brightest star in the heavens, the war was a distant, almost forgotten thing. The next morning, a makeshift stretcher was improvised for the wounded American soldier, and the German soldiers offered a compass and directions for safe passage away from danger and back to their unit. Elizabeth gave her final instructions to the soldier. "Be careful, boys. I want you to get home someday where you belong. God bless you all." The American and German soldiers shook hands, and we watched them disappear in opposite directions. Fritz Winken survived the war and eventually moved to Hawaii, where he opened up a bakery. Hoping to locate some of the soldiers he had met that night, he published his story in Reader's Digest in the 1960s with no response. But in 1985, President Reagan heard about Fritz and his Christmas Eve meal. He used it in a speech to give an example of peace and reconciliation. One of those who heard the speech was a man by the name of Ralph Blank, an elderly veteran living in a nursing home in Maryland. In his possession were a German compass and a map. Both were given to him by the German soldiers who were there on a cold December night in 1944. Fritz flew to Maryland, where he and Ralph were reunited. Fritz was able to locate one of the other American soldiers, but was unable to locate any of the German soldiers that he had met on that night. Fritz was 69 years old when he died in his home in Salem, Oregon on December the 8th, 2001. His story appeared in a 1995 episode of Unsolved Mysteries and later in a 2002 film entitled Silent Night. On a cold winter night in the heart of a deadly battle, 7 enemy soldiers were united for a time of peace around a dinner table. They were brought together by a young boy, a courageous mother, and a rooster by the name of Herman. It was a brief time of reflection and peace from the fighting. Elizabeth Vinken's cottage in the Ardennes forest served as a place of refuge for 7 weary soldiers who sought shelter from a fierce battle. There they had the opportunity to forget about the war and simply rest. All the stresses of the war, including the harsh winter cold, the sound of artillery fire, the fear of death, injury, or capture, were suspended for one night. Ironically, Christmas Eve 1944 fell on a Sunday, the Lord's Day, in the midst of a fierce battle, in the middle of a deadly global war. Reading from Matthew 2, verses 1 and 2. Now after Jesus was born in Bethlehem of Judea in the days of Herod the king, behold, wise men came from the east to Jerusalem, saying, Where is he who has been born the King of the Jews? For we saw his star when it rose, and we have come to worship him. Think about the words, we have come to worship. And think about that night in 1944. And Elizabeth Vinken looking out at the starry skies outside of her small cabin. Suddenly a great company of the heavenly host appeared with the angel praising God and saying, Glory to God in the highest heaven, and on earth peace to those on whom his favor rests. When the angels had left them and gone into heaven, the shepherds said to one another, Let's go to Bethlehem and see this thing that has happened, which the Lord has told us about. So they hurried off and found Mary and Joseph and the baby who was lying in the manger. When they had seen him, they spread the word concerning them. Reading from Henry's commentary, the first 2 people who took notice of Christ after his birth were the shepherds, from Luke 2:15, who saw and heard glorious things concerning him, and made them known abroad to amazement to all that had heard them. After that, Simeon and Anna spoke of him by the Spirit. To all were disposed to heed what they said. And this is the story of Simeon from Luke 2. Now there was a man in Jerusalem whose name was Simeon, and this man was righteous and devout, waiting for the consolation of Israel, and the Holy Spirit was upon him. And it had been revealed to him by the Holy Spirit that he would not see death before he had seen the Lord's Christ. And he came in the Spirit into the temple, and when the parents brought in the child Jesus to do for him according to the custom of the law, he took him up in his arms and blessed God and said, Lord, now you are letting your servant depart in peace according to your word. For my eyes have seen your salvation, that you have prepared in the presence of all peoples, a light for revelation to the Gentiles and for glory to your people Israel. And his father and his mother marveled at what was said about him. And Simeon blessed them and said to Mary his mother, Behold, this child is appointed for the fall and rising of many in Israel, and for a sign that is opposed, and a sword will pierce through your soul also, so that the thoughts from many hearts may be revealed. And there was a prophetess by the name of Anna, the daughter of Phanuel, of the tribe of Asher. She was advanced in years, having lived with her husband 7 years from when she was a virgin, and then as a widow until she was 84. She did not depart from the temple, worshiping with fasting and prayer night and day. And coming up that very hour, she began to give thanks to God and to speak of him to all who were waiting for the redemption of Jerusalem. Again, from Matthew Henry's commentary. Now, one would think that these hints should have been taken by the men of Judah and the inhabitants of Jerusalem, and they should, with both arms, have embraced the long-looked-for Messiah. But odd it appears that he continued for nearly 2 years after that at Bethlehem, and no further notice was taken of him until the wise men came. Note, nothing will awaken those who are resolved to be, regardless. Oh, the amazing stupidity of these Jews, and no less of many who are called Christians. Micah chapter 5, verses 2 through 5 says, But you, O Bethlehem Ephrathah, who are too little to be among the clans of Judah, from you shall come forth for me one who is to be ruler in Israel, whose coming forth is from of old, from ancient days. Therefore he shall give them up until the time when she who is in labor has given birth. Then the rest of his brothers shall return to the people of Israel. And he shall stand and shepherd his flock in the strength of the Lord and in the majesty of the name of the Lord his God. And they shall dwell secure, for now he shall be great to the ends of the earth, and he shall be their peace. Remember, this is the book of Micah, written hundreds of years before the birth of Jesus. In Matthew 2, verses 1 through 7, we read, Now after Jesus was born in Bethlehem of Judea, in the days of Herod the king, behold, wise men from the east came to Jerusalem, saying, Where is he who has been born the King of the Jews? For we saw his star when it rose, and we have come to worship him. Then Herod the king heard this, and he was troubled, and all Jerusalem with him. And assembling all the chief priests and scribes of the people, he inquired of them where Christ was to be born. And they told him, In Bethlehem of Judea, for so it is written by the prophet. And you, O Bethlehem, in the land of Judah, are by no means the least among the rulers of Judah, for from you shall come a ruler who will shepherd my people Israel. Then Herod summoned the wise men secretly and ascertained from them at what time the star had appeared. And he sent them to Bethlehem, saying, Go and search diligently for the child, and when you have found him, bring me word that I too may come and worship you. After listening to the king, they went on their way, and behold, the star that they had seen when it rose went before them until it came to rest over the place where the child was. When they saw the star, they rejoiced exceedingly with great joy. And going into the house, they saw the child with Mary his mother, and they fell down and worshipped him. Then opening their treasures, they offered him gifts of gold, frankincense, and myrrh. And being informed in a dream not to return to Herod, they departed to their own country by another way. Now when they had departed, behold, an angel of the Lord appeared to Joseph in a dream. Rise, take the child and his mother, and flee to Egypt, and remain there until I tell you, for Herod is about to search for the child to destroy him. And he rose and took the child and his mother by night, and departed to Egypt, and remained there until the death of Herod. This was to fulfill what the Lord had spoken by the prophet. Out of Egypt I called my son. Then Herod, when he saw that he had been tricked by the wise men, became furious, and he sent and killed all the male children in Bethlehem and all that region who were 2 years old or under, according to the time that he had ascertained from the wise men. Then it was fulfilled what was spoken by the prophet Jeremiah. A voice was heard in Ramah, weeping, loud lamentation, Rachel weeping for her children. She refused to be comforted because they are no more. But when Herod died, behold, an angel of the Lord appeared in a dream to Joseph in Egypt, saying, Rise and take the child and his mother and go into the land of Israel, for those who sought the child's life are dead. And he rose and took the child and his mother and went to the land of Israel. And when he heard that Archelaus was reigning over Judea in the place of his father Herod, he was afraid to go there. And being warned in a dream, he withdrew to the district of Galilee. And he went and lived in a city called Nazareth, so that what was spoken by the prophets might be fulfilled, that he, Jesus, would be called a Nazarene. In Hebrews 10, we hear the call to worship. Since we have a great priest over the house of God, let us draw near with a true heart and full assurance of faith, with our hearts sprinkled clean from an evil conscience and our bodies washed with pure water. Let us hold fast the confession of our hope without wavering, for he who promised is faithful. Let us consider how to stir one another up to love and good works, not neglecting to meet together, as is the habit of some, but encouraging one another, and all the more as you see the day drawing near. In John 9, Jesus healed a man who was blind from birth. They asked him, was he blind because he sinned? Or was it because his parents sinned? Because the disciples are looking to understand the reason why someone would be afflicted. But Jesus answered, he said, it was not that this man sinned or his parents, but that the works of God might be displayed in him. We must work the works of him who sent me while it is day. Night is coming when no one can work. As long as I am in the world, I am the light of this world. And with that, he healed the blind man. John 12 said, now is the judgment of this world. Now will the rule of this world be cast out. And I, when I am lifted up from the earth, will draw all people to myself. He said this to show by what kind of death he was going to die. So the crowd answered him, we have heard from the law of the Christ that the Christ remains forever. How can you say that the Son of Man must be lifted up? Who is the Son of Man? So Jesus answered them, the light is among you for a little while longer. Walk while you have the light, lest darkness overtake you. The one who walks in the darkness does not know where he is going. While you have the light, believe in the light, that you may become sons of light. I love the image that Michael Card gives us in his song, Emmanuel. It's the image of light. He said, for all those who live in the shadow of death, a glorious light has dawned. For all those who stumble in the darkness, behold, your light has come. Emmanuel, our God is with us. And then from John Michael Talbot, he sings, eternal light has come upon mankind, yet mankind has chosen darkness. If we openly confess, we need his light. We need his love. Light has created all the world, yet the world did not receive him. If we walk within the light, as he is the light, he is the light, and though we have sinned, we'll stand forgiveness. It's this image of light that is spoken of in John 3, verse 19. He said, and this is the judgment. The light has come into this world, and people love the darkness rather than the light because their works were evil. For everyone who does wicked things hates the light and does not come into the light, lest his works should be exposed. But whoever does what is true comes into the light, so that it may be clearly seen that his works have been carried out in God. In John 1, says the true light, which gives light to everyone, was coming into the world. He was in the world, and the world was made through him, yet the world did not know him. He came to his own, and to his own people did not receive him. But to all who did receive him, who believed in his name, he gave the right to become children of God, who were born of not of blood, nor the will of the flesh, nor the will of man, but of God. And the Word became flesh and dwelt among us, and we have seen the glory. We have seen his glory. The glory is as if of the only Son from the Father, full of grace and truth. You know, worship is a vital element of spiritual warfare. If we look back to what Elizabeth Vinkin said that night, Christmas Eve, 80 years ago, she started her prayer, "Come, Herr Jesus, be our guest." As I looked around the table, I saw tears too in the eyes of the battle-weary soldiers. Boys again, some from America, some from Germany, all far from home. Come, Jesus, be our guest. That Christmas Eve night in 1944 would become a time for rest. It would also be a time when Jesus would be welcome at the table. Thanks for listening. Hope you enjoyed this story.